She was just busy finishing up at her daughter's grave when she spotted the young child walking toward her. He had golden hair and deep gray eyes. He could not have been older than 7 years old. He gave her a big smile and rushed past her. Her eyes grew wider when she spotted something that initially went over her head. Things were going swimmingly for the McRae family until their whole worlds came crumbling down one day. Their daughter sadly lost her life in a terrible accident. She meant everything to them, and they were heartbroken. When Tammy McRae first heard the news, she did not want to believe that it was true. She was busy with her job when she received the terrible call. She knew that things would be forever altered from that moment on. Tammy fell pregnant with her daughter while she and her husband were finishing college. The pair had been together since high school, and by that point, they were already engaged. After they both graduated from college, they had the wedding of their dreams. Their daughter, Lindsay, was the flower girl, and they couldn't have been prouder of their beautiful girl. The years went by, and Lindsay grew into an amazing 18-year-old woman. Her parents were very proud of all of her accomplishments. She was a straight-A student and always helped around the house. Not only did they have a great daughter, but they also had a beautiful house with high-paying jobs. However, one day, everything took a turn for the worst. To comprehend the boy at the cemetery's story, we must first learn something about Lindsay. She had always been the smartest student in her class. She tried to be involved in as much as possible and always did her best. Lindsay had dabbled in everything she could get her hands on, but one evening she'd say something to her parents that would astound them. She returned home and said she needed to sign some organ donation documents from the hospital where she was volunteering, her mother explained. We thought it was a nice gesture and encouraged her to do it. In keeping with her usual approach to everything that she did, Lindsay saw the exercise through to the end and returned home with an organ donation card. Unfortunately, Tammy and Chester were eventually going to lose her. Tammy was busy at work when she received the terrible news. Her sweet daughter was in a car accident on her way home from school. She was on her way to the emergency room. Tammy did not know what to do with the news she had received. She dropped what she was doing and rushed to the hospital. She'd be speechless when she saw what she'd uncovered. Tammy had just arrived at the emergency room when her daughter was pronounced dead. Tammy wanted nothing more than to be by her daughter until she finally found peace. Time lost all of its meaning, and Tammy and Chester's lives were colorless. They were torn over the loss of their daughter, until something happened that changed it all. It had been a few months since their daughter's funeral, and Tammy made sure to visit her daughter's grave every single night after work to say hello. She knew that her daughter wouldn't want her parents to be consumed by sadness, so they tried everything in their power to adapt to their new normal. But that month, something peculiar would catch Tammy's interest. Tammy was walking back to her car when she spotted a young boy passing. He must have been around 7 years old, and he had light blonde hair with deep gray eyes. He gave Tammy a small smile as he walked past her. She initially shrugged it off, but as the days passed, she became aware of something. Tammy ran into the same boy the following evening. The week would continue in this same manner before Tammy decided she'd at least try to see why the boy was always at the cemetery at that time of day. As the new week started, she decided to stay back after greeting the boy on her path back to her car. As always, he smiled, waved, and walked by her. But this time, she didn't leave. Tammy shadowed the boy with her phone's camera recording, only to see him walk to Lindsay's tombstone. He stood over it for some seconds before sitting down. The scene didn't make any sense to Tammy, who stopped recording. She couldn't think of why the boy was next to her daughter's grave. Thinking maybe he'd confused the tombstones, she decided to step in. As Tammy approached the boy, she considered the possibility of him being one of Lindsay's friends, but noticed he was too young to have known her daughter on such a level. She made sure he could hear her approach so as not to startle him before saying hi again and asking him what he was doing at Lindsay's grave. I asked him if he knew Lindsay, and he said no. Tammy said to a reporter from her town's local news. She also revealed something about the boy that had her tearing up for days. He'd been battling a rare heart condition. After Lindsay passed away, he received her heart through a transplant, which saved his life. But why was he visiting Lindsay's grave every evening if he'd never met her? "Where's your mom?" Tammy asked. He learned from his mom about Lindsay and what she'd done for him, and the past 2 weeks, he had been asking his mom to drive him to the cemetery to talk to Lindsay about his healing process, Tammy shared amid happy tears. The little boy's mother was waiting for him in the parking lot. That's when Tammy approached her and learned all the little boy and his family had been through. Little Sam had been born with a rare heart condition called unbalanced atrioventricular canal defect. This heart defect allowed blood to move freely through the 4 chambers of his heart, causing problems with his heart and lungs. A normal heart has separate chambers to keep the blood from the lungs from mixing with other blood from the rest of the body. By the time Sam was 2, he'd already undergone 4 open heart surgeries. Although the surgeries seemed to help, and Sam was able to live a relatively normal life for a few years, things changed when he turned 6. Although he'd been on the heart transplant list since he was 3, no viable hearts had been donated. Sam's condition continued to worsen. His mom, Jane, was beginning to lose hope. According to the American Heart Association, the average wait for a heart transplant depends on several factors. However, it's hardly ever a quick process. Sam had to wait 4 years, which is longer than most. When he was 6, his heart began to fail. He was hospitalized and had to stay there until a heart became available. With a serious shortage of donated organs, some people wait years to receive a heart transplant. In fact, around 3,500 Americans are on the heart transplant waiting list at any given time, and they are usually critically ill or die by the time one becomes available. Sam was deteriorating right in front of his family's eyes, but all they could do was pray and wait. His case was particularly difficult because they had to wait for a heart that was the perfect size and blood type. Jane will never forget the day she got the news. "His primary doctor came up and told me he had a transplant," Jane said in an interview. "I think that was the biggest shock for me. Like, wow," she added. "It almost was so unreal." Sam was admitted for surgery the very next day. Meanwhile, Tammy and Chester had just received the news about their daughter, and their lives were falling apart. "As I watched his chest rise, my heart got heavy. God bless the family who chose to donate this precious gift of life to my baby boy," Jane wrote on Facebook. Thankfully, Sam's surgery was a success. Jane immediately saw a difference in his condition when he was wheeled out of the operating room. She couldn't believe her eyes. Before going in for the heart transplant, Jane had noticed that her son's skin had been a blue-gray color as a result of not receiving enough oxygenated blood. When he was returned from the operating room, Jane immediately noticed the color of his skin. "My first reaction was his color," Jane recalled. "When I looked at him, his color was amazing. Soon after he was revived, Sam's breathing improved and his oxygen rose up to normal levels, all thanks to Lindsay's heart. We will be forever grateful for the selfless act, for the family who saved our son's life," Jane said. "Always have faith, because miracles do happen." In fact, Jane made it her mission to find out who had donated their heart to her son. Jane found out who had donated their organs through a nonprofit organization, the United Network for Organ Sharing. Days after the transplant, she found Lindsay's obituary in the local paper and read her funeral announcement. She learned all about the young woman and how giving she'd been in life until it was suddenly snuffed out forever. Her heart broke for the McRae family. She wanted to do something. Jane had been waiting for the right moment to contact the McRae family to express her gratitude for their daughter's final, selfless act, but she didn't want to approach them so soon after their loss. In the meantime, she told Sam about the girl whose heart he had, and he insisted on visiting her at the cemetery. Finding the plot number wasn't hard. But now, she was face to face with Lindsay's mother. Tammy listened to Jane's story and felt a wave of emotion hit her. After months, the pain of losing her daughter was not as sharp. Now it felt like a dull, heavy ache she carried with her everywhere. Everything reminded her of Lindsay. Now the little boy standing in front of her was literally carrying a piece of her and keeping it alive. She didn't know how to feel. Grief comes in waves. Tammy had been holding it together that day for the first time in months, but suddenly the wave crashed over her, threatening to completely engulf her. Lindsay's beautiful heart had been a perfect match for Sam. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't be here. Tammy, who had been completely silent until now, asked a question. Tammy couldn't wrap her head around the situation. The sudden loss had been so hard to accept in the first place. Now she knew Lindsay was, in a sense, still with her. "May I hear it?" Tammy asked through the tears. "May I listen to her heart?" Sam nodded, so she knelt down and placed her ear against his little chest. She closed her eyes, and there it was, the quick, strong thud of Lindsay's heart. Tammy lost herself in its rhythm. She let it soothe her searing pain like a cool balm. For the first time in months, she had a sense that everything would be okay. She loved to share, so part of her life and giving some of it to Sam and other children is part of who she was, she said, smiling. Tammy contacted the United Network for Organ Sharing to learn who had received Lindsay's other organs. It turned out that her daughter had saved 8 other lives with her organs the day she died. 2 people had her lungs, another had her liver, and others had various other vital pieces of her. The McRaes met all of them, but they felt closest to Sam, the little boy who had her heart. Tammy and Chester had forgotten that their daughter had signed up to be an organ donor before passing, and couldn't believe she'd saved so many lives. "It's truly the circle of life in its rawest form," Tammy said. "She could never let a soul suffer if she could do something about it. That's our Lindsay."